What is urbanizing? Move to the cities. Okay, urban and cities. We need this time period. We're going to have, and again, various statistics in here, but by 1900, 40% of Americans have moved to the cities. By 1920, it was 50%. Wow. So you see, I mean, during the 1800s, we start out the 1800s with less than 10% in the cities, and we moved to almost a century later, close to half the people. Yeah.
How much is 10% of the? Because it says it went from 40 to 50% in that 20 years.
Right.
So how much is 10% of the population?
I don't even know what the actual millions would be. Oh. And some of that was by immigrants moving in. It wasn't all people going to us. All right, remember we had push-pull factors with the immigrants. Well, we have push-pull factors for people moving from the rural areas into the city. Some things that were pushing them towards there. They needed less farmers. Even though we had all this land that we were now farming from the Homestead Act, but we didn't need as many people farming because one farmer could farm a lot more. So if a farmer had 3 sons, 2 of them might farm, another one go off to the city. And same with some of the daughters that they're going to. A lot of the other countries, and this is where the immigration part fit into it, where other countries, we had a lot of people that were poor that were moving for that reason. All right, the pull factor. All right, why is it that some of you want to move to a city? I mean, I know Inverness is a huge city, but why would you rather be living in Tampa, Atlanta?
Do we get walls?
Creature comfort.
Jobs.
Okay. Which jobs? What else?
Clubs. Nightlife.
All right, nightlife. All the things that are going on. Was that true 100 years ago?
No. Yes.
Yes. I mean, and think how much difference there was 100 years ago. If you were out in the middle of nowhere, compared to
the middle
a city,
of the night,
because you all are connected with the rest of the world, where 100 years ago you weren't. So that's where you have the pull factors. People want to go someplace there. All right, Great Migration. I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit here, but this is one of the things we're going to see also ends up happening. In the late 1800s, we're going to have this shift of African Americans from the South to start moving to northern cities. And we come to its climax there during World War I. Why would a lot of blacks move from the South to northern cities during World War I? Yeah, the jobs. As we have all these factories for building things for World War I, it provided jobs there. And this is why we would end up with a lot of northern cities having huge black populations after 1900 when they didn't before. All right, the city changes. Remember we had the part with the impact of steel. We have skyscrapers. They're going up. So we have these nice buildings. We have these safety elevators, the transportation improvements. We have railroad lines, subways being built, elevated cars, streetcars, again, trolleys, bridges. So these are all things and kind of making the city, it's growing up, it's growing out. But what are some bad things about cities even today?
Sanitation.
Sanitation, pollution, crime.
Crime, I was going to say that.
Okay? And those were actually some of the exact same things that were some of the negatives of being a city at that time. Usually your infrastructure of a city is lagging behind a decade or two. And in the late 1800s, we still have horses, and we have a lot more people. We have horses with carts.
They take a lot of space.
They take a lot of space, plus they leave a lot of space also. And how do you get rid of all of that?
Just sweep it into the rivers.
Well, and actually, that was if they could do it. And when I show you in the fourth quarter, we're doing the review, I'm actually going to show you there's a part from American Story of Us of this guy that came in charge in New York City. And part of what he did was he came through with a bunch of people with white suits, and they cleaned up, and they pushed all that stuff and basically washed it out and washed it in the river. But what they usually did is just pile it up somewhere. So it'd be trash, it would be manure. All right, I mean, all of this just piled up, and so the sanitation was horrible. And a lot of this would then end up being built, and this is what was kind of a step to the progressive era that we try to get people out of this. Crime and fire. City of Chicago, Boston. I mean, Chicago, the fire in 1871, supposedly Miss O'Leary's cow knocked over a lantern, all right, and then the wind swept through and burned down the whole fire. Now, there were some good things about the fire. If you go to the city of Chicago, when they rebuilt the city, they made it where it was actually a more modern city. Where Boston, even though they had a fire, they did not rebuild that, and it wasn't quite as big in that same year. If you're in Boston today, the streets are extremely narrow because they built these giant buildings where there used to be little buildings, so they're really narrow streets. But in Chicago, once they built it, they built wider boulevards, so it isn't quite as bad for a lot of Chicago.
When did they finally evolve fire trucks that could house?
It was, and this is where that's where that triangle shirtwaist fire, which if you kind of look at history, last Saturday, almost the same sort of thing happened in Bangladesh, where there was I think 112 workers that died, and they had locked up the exits. All right, and then so the workers, a lot of them had died in that case, but this is where it was in the early 1900s, and that is one thing that spurred maybe. And unfortunately, sometimes we have that where you have a lot of problems. For a while there in Citrus County, we were looking at things. I knew a friend of mine that was a fireman, that we had no fire truck in this county that was big enough to actually take care of some of the bigger things. A big fire took place in the hospital, which the hospital wasn't a problem as much because they do have a sprinkler system, or some of the bigger homes that we have in Crystal River on Kings Bay. And they have in the last few years finally bought a truck that actually would take care of some of those. But for the most part, I mean, how many buildings do we have in Citrus County above 3 stories?
There's actually a law on where you can't have a building so high.
Right, and so and that's why I think the only reason why the hospital was able to go as high as it did is because it's hospital and had the entire sprinkler system. It basically has its entire fire system built in it. So, but that's where, and for Crystal Rivers, one of the things is some of those are built up higher, basically on stilts, and then you'll have a 3-story house on top of the stilts. All right, some of the leisure activities, the dance halls. You read about that in Charity Girls.
Are those like clubs?
What?
Are those like clubs?
Yeah, it's basically like a nightclub. Social halls, and this is where I put ethnic on it. You're going to see far away where we have the Italians, we have the Irish with their own club. We have it here in Citrus County. We have an Italian American club. We have a couple other the old clubs. It was kind of that kind of goes back from that time period. The concert halls that are being built, whether it be for smaller type concerts or we have with Rockefeller Center and Carnegie Hall that are being built. All right, have on their Charity Girls. You read about them. What is vaudeville?
It's a style of entertainment.
And what type of entertainment?
Singing, food shows, that kind of thing.
Yeah, singing, dancing, just an entertainment show. And that became extremely popular. Again, the changes that took place with electricity. Now we have cities that are lit up. So at night, you didn't have to go home and basically by candlelight or your fireplace. You have street lights, and before that you had some kerosene lamps, but then you go to electric lights, and you could have those type of clubs there that you have. So a vaudeville act that people would go for entertainment. A fraternal organization. I know a lot of times when you hear fraternal, you might think fraternity and you think universities. But we also have fraternity organizations. We have those right here in Inverness, an Elks Lodge, a Moose Lodge. What do you have to do to get into an Elks Lodge?
Just be invited.
Yeah, you're invited. And basically you go through like a fraternity there. There's certain things that you have to do. They don't kind of do the same things as they do for like a pledge for a fraternity, but then you join, and most of them have some sort of charity that they work for. But most of them have their own bar inside there, so it's almost like its own private club. Yeah.
I know they burn coal and whatnot, but what other, is that the only thing they did to like make electricity back then?
No, this is where we would start to get, and then this is where, as we go through the 1900s, some of the early systems of hydroelectric and systems like that. But yeah, it was mainly coal in the beginning, but you would have coal. I don't think there was any natural gas, but there may have been some that burning oil. Some actually, where today we're going back to some things natural wood. I mean, it wouldn't be very big of an electric plant, but you could get something. City of Gainesville actually is in the construction of one that they'll be doing that. What's a pub?
It's a bar.
It's a bar. It's a little small corner bar. Okay, and this is where, for a lot of people, socialize that they would be going to. Amusement parks come about. Where's Coney Island?
New York.
Okay, New York. And I forgot what year it was, but it was sometime in the late 1800s that the first roller coaster was invented. Okay, so we have these type of things that are going on. And it's, as people are moving to the city, as they have more free time, as they have some extra money, these are things that are going on in our American cities. For some people, entertainment is shopping. We have chain stores and department stores. Today we still have Marshall Field's from Chicago. And Macy's in New York. The Gimbel brothers were in Philadelphia. Okay, those were just giant stores they have. What's a tea room?
A room where there's tea.
It's like a parlor.
Yeah, it's like a parlor, but what else?
It's like a party place.
It's a party place? Who's going there to party though?
Women.
Old people.
Well, yeah, today's all. But at that time, the tea rooms were basically for your richer or middle class women. They would go to this parlor. It would be a nice little area, and they would go and they would be proper women drinking their tea. So if you were a middle class woman, you might go have lunch at a tea room, and then you go and go for a little shopping at one of these department stores. What?
That's the charity.
No, this is the middle class. And what you have to realize is what we call middle class today, I mean, at that time, and there's something that I want you to kind of see that's a little bit different. Middle class, 100 and, well, let's make it 1900, just in 1900. Middle class in 1900 might have a cook, might have a person that is a housekeeper, as like a full-time employee. Now, most of Citrus County is middle class. Most of you are what would be considered middle class. We're a very middle class county. Any of you have a cook at home? Don't say mom. You have someone that you've hired. So, is our middle class not as rich as it used to be? But here's where the difference is. Do any of y'all ever go to a restaurant? And that's kind of a very middle class idea. The only difference is now, instead of having where you have the money to pay someone to come to your house and cook, you go to the restaurant. Do you have to be rich in order to have a cleaning person come into your house? No. I said, my wife and I, we're both in schools. We're not rich. Every other week, we have a cleaning person come in. Okay, it was kind of a present that I gave to my wife one time, and it just keeps giving and giving. All right, but it is something that for us, I mean, it's one of those things that at least we know once every 2 weeks our house is thoroughly being cleaned. Actually, they came this morning. It's kind of funny because my wife went through it. She actually went out and mopped the floor before the cleaning people came. All right, it's funny with a lot of people that I know that have that. You end up, but it is kind of good because, like for my kids, it's like you have to have your room cleaned up. All right, they're not doing the normal cleaning. The idea that they do is the little stuff that you always say, oh, we can put off dusting. All right, cleaning the bathrooms, all right, we'll put that off. So, I mean, basically they come in, thoroughly go through in about 2 hours and take care of a lot of stuff that we neglect along the way. There doesn't mean that we're rich at all. Okay, it's just kind of one of the things that we kind of have as a treat to ourselves. But that is something that is still with middle class that you can do. All right, sports and entertainment we have in vaudeville. What are movie palaces? Yeah, movie theaters. Who invented the motion picture? Or pretty much invented? Yeah, Thomas Edison. All right. When in doubt, when you say invention, say Edison. Okay, because this is where in this time period, he's making one thing or another. Trivia, the great trivia to remember was the very first silent movie is The Great Train Robbery. And that's going to be a movie that you're going to need to kind of remember along the way, which goes back to our western side. And notice how this is kind of coming together because it has a train robbery that takes place out west. And we're glorifying things out west.
Did they have cartoons before that?
Sometime around that's when cartoons came about. If you go to Disney World and when you first walk in at Main Street, realistically that is the Victorian Age. Now the music ragtime. Those of you that know with music, this is basically a step before you get to jazz. A lot of times you kind of think, and this is where if you go to Disney World Main Street, they have this form of ragtime music. I don't know music well enough to say exactly how it is different from jazz. What is?
It's offbeat. I played a lot of it.
Okay. All right, and so it's more the rhythm.
YouTube's unblocked, by the way.
Okay, yeah. I mean,
Maybe we frag one.
okay, yeah, and that's where. And Scott Joplin, I used to have him in the People Report, so I don't think I did for you all. He's one that I eliminated here. It's kind of. And this is trying to give you one person that I remember. He may have been the biggest artist at that time. All right, sports. A lot of the new sports that were coming about. Baseball was getting big. Basketball. Why did Dr. Naismith invent basketball? Yeah, basically bored. In the wintertime, need something to do sometimes. Okay, so it's an inside.
I can't believe that was right.
Biking. You know, you see the pictures of the big old wheeled bike with the little wheel in the back in this time period. And this is where, for people in the city, it was one that it was an entertainment that you would have. Tennis and golf is growing at this time. You're also going to see we're going to have education, we're going to have universities grow. And then we have the NCAA come about. National Collegiate Athletic Association, still around today. And they would organize things. We have the Ivy League schools that are playing football with each other. Crew, what is crew?
Rowing.
Yeah, the rowing there. Some of the bigger sports that you would have against the different universities, swimming and track. Notice we don't have basketball on there, don't have baseball. Those weren't bigger collegiate sports. What's kind of odd with this is football for the longest time, where today it is the king of sport events in America. For the longest time it wasn't, because for professional sports, boxing's still the number one. Horse racing's still up there. But we have these newer sports that are coming about. And then one thing you'll see where this connection with the bikes. A lot of these people are trying to invent better bikes and new ways of doing bikes and tinkering with it. And then there was these two brothers. They got out and done not just building bikes. Yeah, the Wright brothers. And that's where, well, let's see, can we get something to fly up? And that's what part of that time period that we would have. All right, last part we'll do today here, the print entertainment. Newspapers got cheap. Newspapers might cost a penny a day. That's pretty cheap, except for, that would be like today, $1. Now, the thing is, now some of you say, I'm not paying $1 for a newspaper, but if you're a middle class person, could you easily afford to pay $1 a day for a newspaper?
If you want it.
And again, this is where we made with a cheaper paper that people could, and they may not always. That's why you always hear on there, hurry, 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 and they basically step by it, because when there's a major story, they print more newspapers to sell. Yeah.
Did they have a smaller, like, amount of money than a penny back then?
Yeah, I mean, this is, well, no, they did not have. I'm sorry. No, that's where it was low. Magazines, we have the beginning of our muckrakers, which we're going to have them more in our next section. I've had a few things in here. All right, the idea of yellow journalism. If newspapers are cheaper, are they going to try to get people to buy them?
Yeah.
And how do you do it?
Make it juicy.
Yeah, make it juicy. Sensationalize the news. And this is where you should know these names already from your people quizzes. Pulitzer and Hearst. And they were in competition with each other with their New York papers and trying to get bigger stories. All right, with our muckrakers, they started out with writing little exposés in magazines. Harper's Weekly, and these are kind of, you need to know Harper's Weekly, the late 1800s, that was one of the biggest magazines in the time period of the Civil War. It still is. Remember, Thomas Nast was one of their main drawers for them. Ladies' Home Journal, and you're going to see for the muckrakers they would have. Anyone recognize the name Edward Bok? Because he moved to Florida. If you've ever been to Lake Wells, he built a tower, Bok Towers, and it overlooks like in the hills over there in Lake Wells. But that's where he had built a home in Florida. Beautiful place there for the Bok Towers.
So were the newspapers more like Global Inquirer or something, kind of like today, or was it part like half and half?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it's kind of like Fox News and MSNBC. They were truth, but they stretched the truth.
Okay.
And and then try to get a different picture with it. Do they try to get a soundbite that is a catchiest, juiciest soundbite?
Yeah.
Okay, and do they try to get some strange picture or something like that? And the same thing was true then. That's what you would try to do. Yeah, you didn't want to make, although sometimes they would totally make up a story there. You didn't want to have it where it was totally untrue, but that's where you kind of take things and stretch in one way or another. All right, dime novels. We have continued the cheaper books. Again, that's one of the reasons why our viewpoint of the Western came from these cheaper books. The writing of realism. Anyone have an idea of what, when you write in a realism style, how you're writing? It's not nature in this
What's
case.
really going on?
Yeah, basically what's really going on, reality. Where before we were writing, and this is where earlier it was usually based on nature, our romance writers was actually with nature. Here. Some of you may have had to read Stephen Crane. What's the Civil War book? I'm slipping my mind in here right now. But there's a Civil War book. It used to be something you read in middle school, but I don't think we have it anymore. Mark Twain. Okay, a lot of the stories there. He was our biggest writer of that. Horatio Alger, even though he was writing the stories for the Luck and Pluck series there, they still were realistic. Here's where we kind of see this mixture of things with the muckrakers, and William Dean Howells happened to be a little above it before his time, because he started writing about how we as Americans, we were materialistic, a little bit shallow.
Oh, we were.
And we're going to see in the 1920s, we're going to have a group of writers, lost generation writers, that come about and do that. In the 1950s, we're going to have the beatnik writers come in and do that. Dressler, Sister Carrie. This is not a true muckraker writing, but with Sister Carrie, he was showing where these women were moving to the city. What happens to them? Were any of these nice, innocent farm girls that moved to the city ever taken advantage of?
Nah.
Okay, did they ever get in bad situations? And so that's why he was writing, and it was, and again, realistic of how that was. All right, we'll go ahead and stop right there. So people are buying more things out of stores. They're not as self-sufficient. But even with the canned goods, and this is where I told you need to have the different parts put together. So our cattle drives, and we are canning meats together. You see on here some of these pictures: roast mutton, range canning. Okay, so some of the early canning, what they're doing, so people can get canned goods. Shopping becoming fun. We have Macy's, Marshall Fields that are established, the Gimble Brothers, the tea rooms that the middle class women are going to. But here's where I want you to have, we have cities, but we also have it, if you went out on a homestead and you're in the middle of South Dakota, you can order most anything you want from the mail order catalogs. If you've got one of these, I mean, look on here, this I think is from early 1900s, but a Sears motor buggy. You could buy a car from Sears. Okay? You could buy a house from Sears, because they had where everything was there. All the materials of the house would come on the train, and then you put it together.
Is that the present
Okay,
day Series?
you could buy drugs. Yes, it's the Sears and Roebuck, and that's how. But it got started by where he started out with he got basically a deal for a whole bunch of pocket watches, and he was a telegraph operator. So he sent off a message for, does anybody want to buy a pocket watch? Which I don't remember, but let's say he bought them for what would be $2 a piece and sold them for $4 a piece, and he had all these orders come in, and he realized, ooh, this is a way to do business. I can ship things through. And here is where rule-free delivery comes in. Do you remember we had that before? It meant that the post office would ship things basically for what would be a normal postage there. So again, you could be in a far off place.
How would the payments work? Would you pay once you got there, or would you pay before?
A lot of places, and some of you may have read when you were younger, where the red fern grows.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's kind of that idea where the boy ordered the dogs. He ordered it from a catalog. The dogs came, and what it was is where his grandfather owned that store. He then paid to get the dogs, and actually, if those of you that remember the store where he saved everything up, and when it actually ended up buying it, it was a lower price than what he had, so he had some extra money. But then they would only deliver him dogs so far, so that's why he went to that town to go and get them then. So, and he bought other things for the rest of his family. So.
Didn't he buy candy or something?
What?
Was that set?
No, but it's the
Didn't he buy,
same
like,
idea
Mr.
because
Candy
that's
or
supposed to be the
something?
1920s, 1930s. So a lot of these ideas still keep going on. I mean, and that's why. Remember when we started this whole section, I was kind of telling you the changes that took place from 1880 to 1920 were tremendous. Since that time, we've basically improved everything. We have not had as much as things are changing and changing quick. We're actually more improving things that we have, not completely. I mean, when you think the difference of before we had electricity in cities and afterwards, I mean, you're talking about, I mean, 10 to 20 years in some cases, just a dramatic difference that you would have. And some places wouldn't get that electricity until the Great Depression in areas in the down into the South. All right, also advertising, mass marketing. And this is something that's actually throughout American history. Each time we go through and we seem to get more and more consumer and the advertising increases. All right, education changes. Here's where we have a mixture of things thrown together. And you notice in your notes, I don't have a whole lot of blanks or a whole lot of things for you to write. I'm kind of giving you a lot of these things, some of this that we've had before. Americanization of immigrants. One of the things that we wanted to do, one reason why some people push for public schools, make sure that the immigrants learned English. Make sure they learned our customs. Because part of what we do in school is to brainwash you. Okay, it is to indoctrinate you. Now, some of the things we're indoctrinating you on are love of your country. Okay, why is in the second period we stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, is that a good brainwashing?
A beautiful song.
And when we get to the next section, we'll actually see how much do we have though before we get to beautiful song. All right, but you get to a certain point. At what point do we go from patriotism to nationalism? All right, when is there a point that you're saying everything is right for your country? The Dawes Act. We're doing the same thing that for the immigrants we're doing with the Native Americans. And I know this is something that for some of you might recognize this if you know the name Jim Thorpe, one of the greatest athletes in American history. But one of the most famous schools that we had for Indians was the Carlisle School. That we had. But this is part of the Dawes Act. We're going to Americanize these Indians. More mandatory schooling for younger ages and trying to get the education there that we have. Expansion of colleges, technical school. Here's where the gospel wealth effect. Anyone ever heard of Vanderbilt? Okay. And
Railroad guy.
Stanford University. He was actually a railroad magnate also, and that's where Stanford University, one of the top academic universities in America, in California. Here in Florida, Stetson. Anybody remember what our Robert Baron Stetson made his fortune on? Yeah, hats. Okay.
Those ones with the big, like,
Well, he would have all kinds
Feathers
of
in
those.
'em.
That time period was more the little hats that really got fixed. Okay. If you go to Stetson, nearby DeLand, I mean, what, less than an hour and a half from here, what is their mascot?
A hat.
The Hatters.
The Hatter.
They're the Hatters.
The Mad Hatters.
Okay, so that's where and there's a lot of universities that are that way. The Morrell Land Grant colleges. Here's where agriculture is connected with this. Show the Commercial University of Florida does, where they were one of the 6 land grant colleges that also were not agricultural and developed other universities. And here's a major thing going into our next section. A lot more colleges for women. Where today was the anniversary of, all right, let's see if you remember trivia. What was our first college?
Oberlin.
Okay, Oberlin's the first college.
Yo.
All right. In the 1830s, we have Oberlin for the first one for women. Well, now we have a lot more colleges. But then we're going to have, and this is where we kind of segue into the next into one of the coming sections in here. What happens if, Jessica, you go to college, you get your college degree, but as a proper woman, you're actually supposed to go and get married. And once you get married and have kids, are you supposed to be really using that college education? No. So we kind of have a conflict. So here it is, learn to think, learn to do this, and then now you go into a home. And some of these women, now some women, would spend their time going to the tea rooms, doing the shopping, but we're going to have other women that are going to get involved in other things. And here's where we would have. Those of you that don't know Mount Holyoke and the sister schools, we have the sister schools to the Ivy League schools. Wesleyan, I can't remember all of them. All right, Victorian Age. Age of Victoria, Queen Victoria, and this is when Britain, the sun never shines on the British Empire. But this is where a lot of the idea of being proper came from. And when we were watching the parts from far and away, all right, the difference in the dress, think about what you saw of how the Victorian dresses here compared to some of those girls that you saw in the dance hall. Okay, where you read the reading on the charity girls. All right, what's the difference with them? And some of these attitudes, and that's one reason why I had you read that charity girls article. What's the attitude? What's the difference between the middle class and the working class? And what they say was right. All right, growth of the middle class. Vacations became more common. Now, here's where the thing is for vacations. When you all think about taking a vacation, and you're going to go someplace, how long do you go on vacation?
A week.
Yeah, and that's kind of a common thing here. We're going to go on a big vacation. We're going to go away for a week, maybe 10 days. All right? But when vacations were at that time for middle class, you would go for like 2 or 3 months. Which is one thing where here in Florida, if you were a upper middle class or wealthier family, that's where for Florida. Do you really want to be in Boston in January and February?
No.
Well, you take a train ride. It'll take you a couple of days, but you take a train ride, but you take one of those Pullman sleepers. It's not that bad of a trip. You go down to Florida and spend January, February, and come about the middle of March or so, you decide to head back to Boston. Nice little vacation. And that's where we had, but you have to realize we didn't have as much in the middle class. We had our wealthy, we had our middle class, and then we had a lot of people in the working class. But that's where vacations happen. All right, the effect on women. Here's where I was referring to for Jessica. She's middle class. She went to college. She gets married. She's got some spare time. What is she going to do with her spare time as a college-educated woman? And Victorian architecture and suburbs. These are actually some houses. A house here in Inverness. I don't know which house this is, but I know I was looking up. Our courthouse is also in the Victorian architecture. One thing that makes our courthouse unique compared to others in Florida, we have a square inside a diamond. Where there's a lot of courthouses that were inside a block, but we actually adjusted ours where the doors go to the points thing, so inside a diamond there. Here's where a lot of that architecture that you probably think of with it, which is a real popular architecture when people think back for America there and think Americana. But this is where we're kind of getting to some of our wealthiness. All right, miscellaneous. Our biggest holiday at the time was the 4th of July. Biggest holiday. Why? Why is 4th of July so big?
Americanism.
Because our country.
Yeah, it's Americanism. Doesn't matter where you're from.
Yeah.
No, I mean, if you're an immigrant and you came to America, it's something to celebrate. Different ethnic groups have different other holidays, but when they come here, it is something that's truly American. And you kind of look at things, 1786, or 1876, sorry, 1876 is our 100-year centennial. I was really young, but I do remember when we had the bicentennial and all kinds of things that were going for the 200-year birthday. Okay, it won't be long that we will have the 250th birthday. So you think the July 4th might be a little bigger around that time. So that's why you kind of look at things and then see. All right, I never pronounced it right. Chautauqua or something movement. Anyone pronounce it right? It's a city in New York was named after.
Chautagua?
Chautagua.
There you go. All right, I have hard enough time pronouncing it, of course, but there. Now, put stars, arrows point to the same. This is one of the obscure things that ends up that you need to know, and it puts it there. Middle and upper class were involved with this, especially the middle class. what you would do, and this was, I couldn't find a lot of pictures of this, but they would have different areas. It started in the city in New York, but it spread to other areas. There's a little town in North Florida, near Chipley, Florida. I can't remember which one, but it was on a spring. And what they built it's like a conference center is what we would call it today. And then people would come, and it would be a conference center resort, but you would be there, you would vacation, but you're also going to do things to increase your mind. And they would have guest speakers come in. Realize that this is a time period that science is really advancing. So you would have scientists come. All right, you would have people that were then saying about and telling about Darwin's theories. Okay, there. You would have people coming about things in religion. We had, and this is where Thomas Edison, he went around to a lot of this, showing off some of his new inventions. Because those are the people that are going to buy those type of things there. Now, the reason why this is kind of an important thing is because when people went to this and they went back, and a lot of times this is where a lot of changes were made after they found out about this. And when we get to the social gospel movement in a second, and then later on the progressive movement, here's where a lot of those seeds were shown. Okay, but that's where some. One person in particular that used this movement was a guy by the name of William Jennings Bryan, a great speaker, and this is where he actually had a lot of his stepping stones, learning how to do things and speaking on things and getting popular. All right, urban poor. Now we get to different parts in the cities. If you see this map, why is it, even today, you go down to Miami, you have different communities, Dominicans in this area, Cubans in this area. Why do we have different ethnic communities inside of a city? Yeah, you're more familiar. Yeah, most of the immigrants that are the new immigrants, they don't speak English. If you don't speak English, would you like to be in a community where you've got some people around that speak your native tongue? There might be relatives, but even if they're not, you have something in common. I'm not sure if this is Milwaukee or Chicago for this map that I have on here, because with German, Irish, Bohemian, where's Bohemia?
Bohemia.
Right, where is that?
Oh.
No, it's actually it's a part of Germany today. Okay, but that's where Germany wasn't totally unified at the time. Swedish, Polish, there. I'm thinking that this is Chicago, but I'm not certain. Here, along the Lake Michigan, but that is where you see the different communities that they would live in. You think about even today, you have Chinatown in different areas. So in San Francisco, New York, Washington D.C. would have their Chinatowns. All right, here's keyword. Notice I have it underlined. What are tenements?
Places where like you would pay to stay with a bunch of other people.
Cheap apartment.
Well, cheap apartments is a way, yeah. If they are cheap, they were usually really crowded. Let's see if I have on here, I should have the dumbbell apartments. Here's a diagram of what a lot of times were called dumbbell apartments. This was a common way to build. And here, and what you do is if you look here, this would be kind of like the stairways. And as you go up, and it would usually be 3-4 stories high, but you would end up having, it looks like dumbbells on here, but you would have on each story like 4 apartments. They might have individual rooms, it might be one big room. And think about if you were in a room here, and this is what your whole family is living in. This is your kitchen, this is your dining room, this is your bedroom. Except for when I say your whole family, for a lot of these immigrants, how many people are in their family living in this one room? It might be even more than that. There might be more people than we have in here right now. And this is where everybody is coming and going and living. A lot of these places had a bathroom, like one bathroom on each floor, or maybe one bathroom in the entire building. Great sanitation, huh? So, but that is where, when you see dumbbell apartments, that's what the idea is. It's the example of tenements. A lot of this for the urban poor, and here's where you have Jacob Riis. He wrote the book, How the Other Half Lives, but he went and he had a better thing than just writing. What did he have that made the message so good? Yeah, the pictures. And what today would be amazing because you would think privacy laws not. He would just go into these tenements, open up the door, take a picture. All right, people that were sleeping and laying there, He takes a picture of them. And then he went back to the richer people and he had these slideshows and telling them, here's what you have. Because these richer people, they had drivers taking them places. They have their cooks. They have their housekeepers. And showing them, here's how the other half lives, which is a lot more than a half of the people. Okay, social gospel. Do not, and this is where I think I told you in the notes earlier, do not get this mixed up with the gospel of wealth. Who does the gospel of wealth? Yeah, Andrew Carnegie. And Andrew Carnegie, the gospel of wealth is about rich people helping out people there. The social gospel, instead of it being the rich, let's take it down one level, and you're usually with the middle class. And one of the things that, in one group in particular that you have, and there's a lot of religion, there's a lot of Protestants. Yeah.
What's the difference between the middle class and the working class?
That time it would be, see today this is where America, this is where it is tricky, because today a lot of people consider themselves middle class. And realistically we're spreading further and further apart when we have upper middle and lower middle there. And today you would kind of look at things that, if we're taking today's salary, the middle class would probably be people that are making $100,000 or more, and then the working class are making like $25,000 or less.
Okay.
All right, there was a pretty big divide that you would have. And actually in this set, this is one thing that people are looking at in America, because we're back in the trend where we're separating more and more. And we kind of go back and forth in America. Never has the separation been as big as it was in the late 1800s. And the progressive era, and this is part of the reasons why it happened. But for the social gospel, those of you that think gospel and think religion, that's a good thing to remember this. Yes?
Would you send James Cook for checkout, please?
Okay. But it's a good thing to remember that for the gospel with religion, because a lot of this has to do with religion. Remember going back to Jessica, she's got her degree in college, now she's at home with the kids, but she's got a housekeeper, because that was actually a little more common for your middle class, or maybe she's even wealthier. What's she going to do with her free time? Well, this is where she started working on things for social gospel. And one of the best examples of this, well, here's some other stuff we have. The Salvation Army started at this time. Around today, what do? Well, besides ring bells. Well, they help out people in need. Okay? And they're actually a great example of what, I mean, who exactly did the Salvation Army help out? Well, they could be homeless. They're one of the biggest organizations that helped out after Sandy. Okay, so they come in after disasters. So and this kind of, it's not like one little thing that the Salvation Army does. And that's kind of the same way that would happen with the social gospel movement. If you also notice with the dates on here, this is about the time that Clara Barton makes the American Red Cross. Here's where a lot of the women, though, they got involved in settlement houses. And what the settlement houses wanted to do was to change the unhealthy environment that these immigrants were living in and the poor were living in. Now, notice I have that in quotes. Sometimes it truly was unhealthy. Sometimes it was just not what they thought was right. Because some of that might be cultural. I mean, there's sometimes that people were living in squalor, and it truly wasn't healthy, but there were times, I mean, and this is where you can be poor and be very clean and be very sanitary. Okay, so don't take it as unhealthy as completely unsanitary. That's why I have it in quotes in there. So what they're trying to do, I say, combat ignorance, poverty, crime. Kind of relates with some of the things. Remember where I said the Dillingham report? We're blaming all the problems that we have in the United States on our immigrants. But here's a way that they are kind of looking to help with this. The most famous of all of them was Jane Addams, who started the Whole House in Chicago. And you might remember her from the People Reports, but that's the most famous of all the settlement houses. All right, City Beautiful. Anyone have a guess what the City Beautiful motive was to do?
Make the city beautiful.
Right. Now, there's a couple different parts of this. And this is where combining the things together. One of it was to try to get rid of some of the slums. And we actually, if you look today, China's kind of in the same way. Sometimes when they built some of the areas for the Olympics, they ended up taking out big areas of slums and forced those people out. We did some of the same things back in that time period, the late 1800s. But what would end up happening is we would have the Gospel of Wealth. Think of Carnegie Hall, Rockefeller Center. We're doing things to help the city culturally. But one of the biggest things that we would have would be the idea for parks. And this is another one of your people from your people to know, Frederick Law Olmsted. And what he would do was design Central Park. And here's some different views of it. There's actually one of the early ones that it had. And it's always amazing to me that the things that Olmsted was planning in the late 1800s, and it would take decades before all the trees would grow to the height that he had planned. But that is where he had planned to make things. And you can go into the middle of Central Park, and you have millions of people around you, but it's as if you're in the middle of a forest. And the way that he designed it and reshaped the ground, and made it where the sound would hit the hills and then drift upwards and help. We'd have other areas that would also try to do those things to fix up the land. All right, women movement, get education. Here's another thing that we have, our social science fields. I have, one of my degrees is a degree in social science education. So what are the fields in social science?
History.
Well, history is, what else?
Physical science.
Well, not physical science.
Economics.
Okay, economics is in that. Okay, government, so political science. What? Here's where we have sociology, psychology. And that's where a lot of women also got involved in this. And if you did a degree in sociology, okay, a lot of times you're going to end up working as a social worker. But this is where these fields came about, which would make sense then when they would start working in a lot of the social gospel movements. One of the movements that women started getting involved in, it's reviving temperance. What is temperance? Yeah, against alcohol. Now, we have the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Now, this would start to gain more and more power. Once we get into the early 1900s, they were one of the main ones that were involved in the 18th Amendment. Frances Willard was the woman that was the main person in charge of the Women's Christian Temperance at their height. And y'all remember Carrie Nation?
Yeah.
Yeah, the hatchet lady there, and what she's finding. Meanwhile, another movement that we have by women is suffrage. What is suffrage?
Voting.
Yeah, the right to vote. In the late 1800s, the most famous of all the suffragettes is Susan B. Anthony, who was arrested multiple times for trying to vote. But here's where these also are put together. Jessica has now become part of working on a settlement house. She's learning leadership. She's trying to take care of things and take care of some of society's ills, but she's not even allowed to vote.
Sounds better.
And as they're in these leadership roles, this is sort of saying, wait, this is wrong. And so that's where a lot of the women also learn their skills from. All right, the settlement houses, again, is where we kind of relate Jane Addams there. And then remember with labor, we have Mother Jones. Okay, she's working against child labor, but she's also working in the labor unions. Okay, and that's our end of this section.
Awesome.